Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Audrey and I talk about everything UX. In the past year, I've started to grow an interest into behavioral economics and how I could integrate that into UX. And most recently, I partnered with Irrational Labs to do their bootcamp, which I'll leave in the description below with a code if you're interested into doing that class. But if you're not too familiar with behavioral economics, if I put that in my own words, I would say it's kind of like a mix of like economics and psychology and how this impacts our decision-making process. So for me, that sounded really interesting because that's like a merge of my two passions, which are psychology and UX. So let's dive into the few highlights that I learned about behavioral economics that I think are going to greatly improve my UX skills. The first one is that people tend to stick with the default. I thought this was really interesting because sometimes we have this impression that more options is better and we tend to want to give the option to people to choose whatever they want or to opt out or opt in of something, but the way that we phrase things are really important. A very salient example is with organ donation. In countries in which the default is that you can opt in if you want to be an organ donor, the rates of people buying into saying that they want to be an organ donor is much lower than in countries that say you are opt-in by a default and you can opt out in your driver's license. So I thought this was really interesting, and this is something that I will try to remember, for example, when it comes to like really important notifications and things like that. The second thing is that the key behavior that I should be focused on when I do a new project research does not equal engagement. So it's more related to UX research, but I think sometimes with stakeholders that maybe have a different agenda or product people who have a different agenda, people are always like saying this buzzword like we want to increase engagement. But when you come to sit down and want to study that or try to improve that, it's like, but what does it even mean? Like, how is it going to have a significant impact? So trying to sit down and define the key behavior that we want people to do more. For example, if we want people to log into our app and save $10 on every Sunday morning, we have to get really specific. So I thought this was a really interesting approach, and really for me, like kind of shifted my focus towards what I think is going to probably have an impact on engagement, but is more specific and actionable, and therefore really helps when designing a research process. Another thing I learned or sort of remembered, because I had learned this into my psych background, but I didn't necessarily connect the dots together, is how much the environment is influencing our decision-making process. An example I found really interesting is that Google wanted to increase the levels of healthy snacks that their employees would be eating instead of M&Ms. So in order to do that, instead of having the M&Ms into like a jar that's transparent where you can see them, they made sure to put the M&Ms in a clearly identified jar, but that was opaque and closed. And within 7 weeks in the New York office alone, employees had consumed 3.1 million less calories in M&Ms. So this is totally mind-blowing, thinking that the only thing that was changed is that the jar was not opaque of M&Ms. So for me, it kind of expanded my focus of thinking, okay, well, when the people will be using our product, in what kind of environment will they be? And how might that influence their decision-making process? That kind of slides into another thing that I'm definitely going to pay more attention to, is I expanded my focus beyond just the user flow. So usually you guys are certainly familiar with the user flow. We start at when the person is on the app, what's the first step? So in order to like increase my empathy of users and their environment into which they will be taking the decisions and interacting with our app, I thought this was really interesting to include into like the whole behavioral map, to have this process where you include before this person gets to your app, like because maybe they received a notification, what kind of context they will be in, and trying to get really specific. And this process really allowed me to see certain barriers to using our apps, or when we send reminders that maybe we're not necessarily optimal. So that was really interesting for me, this process of trying to expand my process to what happens beyond the interacting with our product. The fifth thing that I think will always stick with me, or I'm hoping will always stick with me, is I think I developed a keen eye for the barriers. So what will make our app or our product more difficult to use for users? So I think we can't necessarily always remove all the barriers. Sometimes for security reasons, we need to add some more barriers, or there are sometimes reasons to add a little bit more barrier. And I've seen this thing recently on Instagram, and I think this is really interesting when people, if you try to share something that's related to COVID vaccine or COVID in general, it asks you like, are you sure you want to share this? Do you want to have more information about, you know, COVID-19 and all of that? So this is a great example into which companies have tried to add a little bit of friction in order to maybe decrease the spread of misinformation. But in other contexts, I think it's really interesting to try to think about, is there anything that we included into our user flow just, you know, out of default, we didn't really think of it, but that in real life is adding sort of a barrier or some friction for our user. Something that I think a lot of people are more and more aware of, especially with gamification, it's like a buzzword that I've heard very often, but that can be like a little bit tricky, is to make it feel rewarding. And sometimes that can be a little bit tricky because benefits might not always be super salient, especially in the present moment. If we take the example, I was working on an app where people are trying to plan goals in order to improve their health, like both mental and physical, then, you know, the benefit of going for a walk every day, maybe you feel it right after, which is, you know, great, but you don't necessarily feel it when you plan your goal immediately, or you don't necessarily feel it after one day. Sometimes it takes time. So the more delayed the benefits of using your products are, the less rewarding it feels in the moment for the person, and it's not as motivating necessarily to come back. So many things can be defined as a reward or feel rewarding. It could be a way that we just show progress to people, that we show how much money they will save by that date, for example, or even showing testimonials of other people who use the products and benefited from it. So it's important to try to think about these things, because sometimes benefits are there, but we forget to like amplify them or to make it salient for the person to see how they will benefit from it. And that's definitely a big motivator for people to come back to our product. Number 7, I think, is so great, and something that I guess I had thought about before but never really articulated, is that information alone does not change behavior. Now, as a therapist, a person that worked as a therapist, I can tell you this is totally true. I would say like 90% of the time, people know what they should do in order to feel better, mentally, physically, and for some reason, often they fail to do that. So it's not only information that is going to change people's behavior. So I think for me, it's going to be something, as someone who works more like into the healthcare and wellness field, is something very important to keep salient, that just giving people information of like, this is going to be good for you, so you should do it, is probably not enough, and probably something that a lot of people know already. So it's going to take more than that in order to change people's behavior. So the last thing that I'm going to stay with, and I really wanted to emphasize, is this experimenting culture, which I think is really healthy. Sometimes we have intuitions into how we think people will behave or interact with our product, but I think testing is really powerful because sometimes it proves our intuition is wrong. Like, there was this example of an airline that decided to slow down a little bit their search process for it to take more time and to show, you know, all of the airlines that they were looking through in order to try to find tickets. And it turned out that more people ended up buying tickets from this website. Maybe it kind of increased trust and made it feel like there was more perceived value into this product, because they see that the website is really scanning through all of these websites. So I think a lot of people would think, oh, well, taking a little bit longer to show the search results is not something that is, you know, positive. This company that was selling airline tickets, it ended up really working well. So I think this is really what I'm going to stay with, is that it's okay to have intuitions and impressions, but there's something really powerful into testing those assumptions. Alright folks, so that was it for me. If you're interested into learning more about behavioral economics and design, I will leave in the description below the link to the Irrational Labs Behavioral Design Bootcamp, and anyone who is registering can get a 20% discount with my promo code Audrey. Comment below if you have any questions or comment about behavioral economics. Love to hear your thoughts. And yeah, see you next time. Bye.